Welcome to CEDAR Podcast. Common European Data Spaces and Robust AI for Transparent Public Governance.
So welcome everyone. I'm very pleased to guide you into this new brand episode of the CEDAR Podcast series. I'm Francesco Zimanti. I'm the Research Associate at the Lisbon Council, and I'm also, in this case, the Communication and Dissemination Manager of the CEDAR project. So we're meeting up today with a very specific purpose, with two nice guests that I'm going to introduce you in a very moment to kick off this new series and to share thoughts and discuss around key topics around our initiative, from European policies, modern technologies, and political and societal impact indeed. So I can assume that since you are listening to this podcast, you may have a certain familiarity with the CEDAR project. I will just very briefly remind you that CEDAR is an European Horizon Europe funded initiative whose main objective is to support the development of the Common European Data Spaces concept to ensure the availability and interoperability of data across the main European key players and public administration, while at the very same time observing their full ownership, transparency, and control of data. So today we are trying to, dig a bit deeper and scratch a bit under the tip of the iceberg, and we will try to tap into the opportunity and some potential challenges as well posed by the Common European Data Spaces concept. And in this episode that we decided to entitle Not Only Roses in the Common European Data Spaces. So with no further ado, I'm very glad to introduce you our today's two guest speakers, not to mention esteemed partners of the project as well. So we have today with us Isabella Maria Rosal. She's a legal researcher at TU Leuven University and also the ethical manager of the project, and Giacomo Deli Navelli, legal and policy counsel at the Harters Legal Company based in Netherlands. So I would like to give you, first of all, to Isabella the possibility to introduce yourself, and to you afterward, Giacomo, as well.
Thank you so much, Francesco. It's a great pleasure to be here with you and Giacomo today discussing such a relevant topic on this complex field that is the Common European Data Spaces field with the single market for data in Europe, which is a topic that here in the Center for IT and IP Law in KU Leuven, it's a topic that touches our hearts, and it's a focus of our research, especially considering CEDAR, which also involves the public sector and public governance of data. So it's a topic that I tackle not only in my research projects, but also on my PhD research. So it's actually a real pleasure and a great opportunity to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francesco. Thank you, Isabella. It's very nice to be here as well. To open up to the community, right? The great work that we are doing at CEDAR. Here in Amsterdam, at Harters Legal, we are working on several EU projects. We also work with private companies, with institution organizations. It's all about data, all about building ecosystems, new product, digital services, platform, AI with European values. So this is sometimes, it's said, a bit in abstract, but it's also nice sometimes to dig a bit deeper and say, how do we do that in concrete? So happy to have this conversation today.
So many thanks, guys. So how do we do that? So I wouldn't linger any further. So some keywords like legal, ethical perspective have already popped up and seems to be your very core business expertise. So I'd like with the both of you to jump into the discussion immediately, and maybe we can start by tackling what's happening in Europe, the current European discourse that is focusing, as you know, a lot on pushing forward innovation technologies. How to best exploit the potential of data. So how does this CEDAR fits into this agenda? I mean, who needs data in the field of public procurement? I'd like to start the conversation with you, Isabella, and then move on to Giacomo. So the floor is to the experts.
Thank you, Francesco. Indeed, CEDAR represents very well the discourse that the EU is putting right now in this whole idea of use of data, of exploring the potential of data. While, of course, we still follow this European approach of caring and observing fundamental rights. So CEDAR is involved in this scenario where we are dealing with mixed data sets, meaning that we use both personal data and non-personal data. So we look into regimes of regulation, the EU data protection regulation, but also the EU data law. So in one side, we think a lot about the protection of personal data, and then we do have GDPR as a main legal framework that we have to consider. But on the other side, when we think about the EU data law, we are thinking about maximizing the use and reuse of non-personal data, and to a certain extent also personal data when appropriate. So it is a complex regime, but that is being a main focus of the EU regulatory process, exactly because EU, not only the EU, but the world is understanding the potential of data being personal or non-personal. With this, we have to discuss the creation of a safe and interoperable infrastructure for the exploration of data, and we have to better understand concepts for understanding which law or which regulation applies to each situation. For this, I would like to mention already the work of a colleague. Her name is Charlotte Dukin, and she works exactly on exploring the new strategy for data and exploring this apparent duality between personal data protection and the reuse of non-personal data. And for this, CEDAR is also exploring all of these concepts exactly to think about how the use of data spaces and contribution to data spaces can find answers for this complex system. And then we can think about ways to make data as useful as possible, while we also put in place strategies for ensuring transparency, which is very important, especially when we are thinking about the public sector, and also accountability to show the best practices when we are handling data, being it personal and also non-personal. It's a complex system. Here we are just, as you mentioned, Francesco, we are just starting to scratch the point of the iceberg. But this is a bit of the whole scenario that we are seeing. But I'm also looking forward to hear from Giacomo.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I also like to also look if we see this more from a policy perspective, right? So why the European Commission, the European Union is putting money where their mouth is, right? They wanna see what we can do good with this, and by doing good. I'd like also to mention the recent policy initiative, the policy document on European competitiveness, right? How are we competitive in the global, on a global scale? What data for sure it's an important and essential element of this competitiveness agenda. And in here there are at least a couple of perspectives, right, that we could use. Both with regard generally, so CEDAR is part of, it's one of the, is helping on building the European data spaces, right? The European data space is a concept, it's mainly a concept on how we make data available while keeping a certain level of control, right? And kind of opposing to another system that is more centralized, right? Very huge centralized databases. So in this, the competitiveness element is that we want to increase the supply of good quality data sets that are made available, but still kept under certain level of controls, right? By organization, by individuals, or by states. On the other side, the competitiveness side is also more specifically to CEDAR, it's on the public procurement, right? We want to learn and see how our organizations do procurement. So they buy public goods or they buy goods, services. How they do that? Is there lesson learned? Can we find pattern of inefficiency, fraud, those corruption? And in this way, we still want to do it through data spaces. So data spaces is a way not to go into a database, just take out everything, and then we will find something, as probably they are doing on the other side of the ocean. So we want efficiency in public procurement, in public administration, by keeping a controlled data environment where responsibilities are clear, confidentiality is very well preserved, and the roles and responsibility are also well identified. So I want to I'd like to present CEDAR as a different way, a very specific way of doing enhancing European competitiveness without giving up to our values, right? I will keep it here for now.
Thanks both again for your very insightful replies. Something came to my mind actually. In this first minute, already quite a few relevant flagship initiatives and policies from the European Commission have already come to surface. The Draghi Competitiveness Report, the European Data Governance Act, and whatsoever. I would just like to give the message, reassure you that any corresponding reference of these policies will be emphasized in the description of the episode. So you're going to be finding everything, any further information about these European policies in a corresponding section, as well as for any other publication or scientific papers that our guests might be mentioning over the rest of the duration of the podcast. So I think we broke the ice quite well, but I'd like us to take a step back to the actual title of the podcast, not only roses in the common European data spaces. So it probably is now the time to tackle a bit deeper, let's say, the challenges and the obstacles on our way. I mean, which are the barriers to the new approach proposed by CEDAR, whether they might be legal or technical ones? So I would like to get this started.
Yes, jumping on the name, I think the name of the episode represents very well what we are going to tackle now, talking about challenges and barriers. Because, yeah, we might have some spikes on roses, but we have something beautiful there as well. So when we are thinking about data governance and data use, we do have a lot of barriers. But while we are addressing these, we're finding a balance between the exploration and economic side of data. We are also thinking about the impacts and fundamental rights. So the roses are also there. And indeed, we can think about legal barriers, but also technical barriers. And in the legal aspect, as I was mentioning before, we have this complex system where initiatives as CEDAR get involved in. And for this, we already have a challenge of definitions. First of all, what types of data are being part of the system? What are we considering personal data, non-personal data? And also other aspects and other concepts that are quite new, including data spaces. So what exactly is a data space? What is part of the data space? And that is why it's so important that CEDAR is also involved in different initiatives related to data spaces, so as the DSSC, and then we can also follow up on the best practices on these concepts and the understandings that the community is also building. But of course, then after understanding what we are dealing, we also face the challenges of observing the applicable rules to each one of the systems. And when we think about personal data, we do have a lot of data protection rules and principles that should be observed. And this brings a lot of compliance measures that CEDAR, since the design, has to comply with as way to guarantee that any data subject can enforce their rights, to guarantee that only the necessary data is being used, and all of this also generates consequences technically, because then the solutions provided by CEDAR will also have to observe all these rules and principles. Of course, when we are thinking about the use of data and all of its potential, we also understand that there are risks of errors and misuses, and that is exactly why we deal with protection of data. It's based on protecting society from risks. And when we are thinking of new solutions, as said, we have to also take into this consideration and think about mitigation measures, being them good practices or technical solutions to guarantee that we can mitigate errors and misuses. And thinking about the public procurement, as Giacomo was mentioning, and the CEDAR's role on this complex system of accountability and transparency on public data government, we also have to think about accessibility and who has access to data and information, exactly because for guaranteeing more competition and more development in different areas, we have to guarantee a fair access of data. And this data has to have quality and has to be accurate. And finally, when we are thinking about the EU on these legal barriers, we also have an issue that we have this regional implementation and the EU strategy and the EU initiatives, but we also have to take a look into a national level and understand how these solutions apply into each member state. So this system, this legal framework that is already complex, becomes even more complex. And of course, we have the technical barriers that we already tackled a bit, as, for example, how to connect the different data spaces and how to make them interoperable and how to make them compatible. And for this, we do have already some regulation that is also relevant, as the Data Governance Act, the Interoperability Act, and even the Data Act to a certain extent. So it's important to think about how our technical solutions will translate these topics that are already brought in the legal framework, but that we do require technical solutions for them to really proper work. And when we think about the quality of data, it also becomes a huge challenge when we think about the technical use of data, because we can have a technology that functions very well, but if the data is not relevant and it's not accurate, the results will be not useful for society. So we have to put it all together, and that is why it's so interesting to work in a project like CEDAR, where we, as ethical and legal partners, are in constant conversations with the technical partners. So we can bring all these challenges together and think of solutions to then enjoy the roses and all the perks of the solutions we find in the project.
Yeah, the word also another kind of obstacle. I mean, data spaces, it's a pretty broad concept. It's there in order to show the ambition that we have, right? We want to create in Europe this additional freedom movement of data, right? A market where you can find the data that you need when you need it, accessible, reusable, and all the rest. But sharing is caring, right? So you can making data available means to share something that you had done about a process, for instance, or the data that are being collected for certain activities or for certain products in a way that is usable, so technical standards in this way can help, but also meaningful to others, right? So what is, in my very humble opinion, what is probably we're missing if we're focusing too much on the legislation, the policy initiative? They are all there. So the architecture looks good, it's complete. What is missing, in my opinion, is the incentive. I'm an organization, right? Not necessarily a public one, but also a private one. I want to share, make available certain data that I have. I see now there are many more incentives in keeping everything private, right? In keeping everything under the cloth of confidentiality, security reason, trade secret, right? I'm not sharing, I'm not opening up, because if I open up, at that point I'm vulnerable. So this is something that the law tries to tackle, but until a certain point, because confidentiality, IP protection are still valid reason to oppose a request to access to data, right? Third party rights, right? I want to have my personal data from this, I don't know, food service that I'm using, but I'm using it together with another friend, or from this information, I could learn how the platform actually works. So there are these obstacles that are legal, and legal in itself needs to balance opposing interests, right? Which sometimes can give result to a less than optimal solution. So as part of the data strategy, this is something sometimes controversial, but is there. It's also monetization of data. So kind of this is very complicated, right? What is the economic incentive to open up, to share, to create, to populate the data spaces, right? What is also something, probably this also can help us to the topic of data sovereignty and all the rest, is that today data economy mainly based on big platform, big operators that have vertical integration. So they collect data at a certain point of the chain, and then they reuse them to create other products, other services, or to sell to advertiser, right? So they know, they collect and reuse themselves. They don't need permission, or they don't exchange much. But the European model, the data space model, is different. It's fundamentally based on collaboration, on win-win operations, which have a clear legal structure, even though legal alone cannot save the day.
If I may add on this, because then I got excited hearing you. Indeed, I think you tackled very well, very interesting and complicated topics. And then I just wanted to mention that then I see the opportunity of a project like CEDAR, especially because we are dealing with public bodies. And then we have this obligation of making data as open as possible. And then maybe we can think about exactly how to guarantee that data should be understood as this possible asset for collaboration, and then we can make it as open as possible, especially thinking that public bodies are working on public interest and they are also focusing on society. But then, of course, enters in the other topic that you mentioned, Giacomo, that is the monetization of data. And then there is a lot of challenges when we think about that, indeed, especially if we think about data as an asset. And then enters the duality between personal and non-personal data, because in my mind, it's easier for you to think of data as an asset that then should be monetized, especially when it's non-personal data. And then this collaboration becomes easier. But then if we think that non-personal data is an asset, this may mean that personal data is also an asset, and then this becomes more complicated. But it's one of the topics that I am sure that we are going to find out more about here in the project, and I think you were very right to mention, but I wanted to add on that.
Yeah, very interesting, guys. And And taking the opportunity by looping into to some of the concept you brought up in the last minutes, especially the data sovereignty, but also the accessibility, shareability of the data, that leads me very straight to the next point of discussion. I mean, there is a lot of fuss around these themes. I mean, the European Commission has been trying to, I would say, pave the way, sets the road with some policies. For example, the Digital Decade Policy Program, with some tangible targets and objectives to be achieved supposedly by 2030 to guide the European digital transformation, and towards achieving the digital transformation to empower a more digital, sovereign, resilient, and competitive Europe. So in this framework, I mean, how does all of this concept relate with the objective of building a more independent Europe, less reliant on global tech providers, that fits with the concept of the common European data spaces, and how CEDAR may support on this accomplishment?
Oh, this is a big question, but I mean, we don't need to be afraid of big questions, right? It's important, I think, also to start sometimes from the etymology of the words, right? So we have this word sovereignty, right? And it's a very ancient word. We had in the Middle Age the sovereign as a noun, right? A person that is a sovereign was the king, was the emperor. But then it has to do a lot with the similar concept, which is the concept of control, right? So you can imagine that this concept of sovereignty is very much related to the physical world, right? To states, to borders, to also now with the war in Ukraine, we hear often, the sovereign border, right? Of a state. And then if a sovereign border is violated, there is a loss of control. So also in data, right? The issue of data sovereignty is connected to the question of control. Do I have a meaningful control over my data? This means several things as well. Also, allow me also another step back, and also what you were mentioning, Francesco, the issue, a more independent Europe is also a big concept. And from a technology perspective, what the European Union is very interested, it's in technology sovereignty, right? Technology also in material terms? Do I have control on the tools that we use every day, right? On the cables, on the servers, on the networks, right? That we have? Can we avoid that someone tomorrow switch them off? We are without connection, without servers. If that happens, what do we do? And this is, very relevant also in the country where I'm from, in Italy, right? With all the Starlink debate, right? Should we rely on Elon Musk for our security communication? I don't know. Then there is this other layer that is called a digital sovereignty. It has to do more with software that we use, the conversation that we are having, right, on an American platform. Or if we use Chinese software, right? How much do we know? What kind there was also in the States, a bit less in Europe, if I'm not wrong, on TikTok, right? People spend their life on TikTok. What they view, it's decided where, for what, how much degree of transparency is there, how much are we able to understand what is going on there, if a big chunk of our conversations happen on this platform, right? And then data sovereignty, it's a narrower scope. It's a control over the data. And on this, it's also interesting to see why do we need sovereignty, right? Why are we asking this question? Why are we putting this question in this context? I think it has to do with also this idea of control and autonomy in the world. Are you able to determine your future, to deliver on your strategy, to achieve your strategic interest? And then this you wanna implement, you elaborate and implement fundamental values that you have. The commission had also a certain point a specific document that was the Charter of Digital Rights. This is also, I think, will go in the show notes. And then sovereignty, you implement sovereignty in concrete with procedures, with entitlements. So you have a right to erase your data if you like, right? This is a lot of power that you have. But then there is also clash who is sovereign, right? I have this I have my data on a platform. This platform is collecting data, right? They maybe have built a database. They have a sui generis rights. The database directive give them a right to keep the data because it's part of their effort in building a database. On the other side, I come and ask, oh, please erase all the data you have on me, right? I'm undermining the economic value of the sui generis rights that they have. And here you see that the law in itself has to find either a balance or give precedent to a certain right instead of another, right? Fundamental rights of personal data protection, in this case, prevails on an economic right. But you can see that in a space, there might be multiple sovereign, right? They might need to interact with each other. There might be a state, a public authority that says, look, because there is a terrorist attack, an earthquake, I need access to these databases, right? This is now under the Data Act, if I'm not mistaken. So you can see that data sovereignty is such a complex concept. It's adapted to the digital world in the best way possible. We see, though, that given also the nature of the data, right, the lack of territoriality sometimes, you can see that multiple actors might keep data themselves. They might need to give up a little bit. This is very difficult to hold together. But the concept can be also useful, right? It tries to give a sense of empowerment. You are not just a consumer. You are just not a passive user of a platform, of a service. You actually can decide that they need to forget you, right? To erase everything they have with you. This is a right that you have, right? And this could be pretty powerful if used in a meaningful and sometimes also coordinated way. So this I'll stop, I think. Not know if Isabella, yeah.
I think you tackled basically everything that I think it's relevant on the topic. I just wanted to mention on some things that you brought up that I think are interesting concepts. So first of all, the idea of control indeed is very connected to the topic. And then I think when we think about data, especially if we're thinking of it as an asset, and then we are going a bit further away from the law now and thinking more about economy. When we think about data, we have assets that are non-rivals. So for you to explore data and for you to have control over data, you don't have to have exclusive rights on that data because the data can be everywhere. And that is something that CEDAR is understanding and it's exploring, and I think it's quite relevant. And then also this idea of collaborations beyond borders, especially, even thinking about the use cases that CEDAR is going to explore, this idea that we have the EU, but also other countries that are partners and we can collaborate with. It's very relevant and very interesting, and it adds to the complexity of sovereignty. And finally, I think when we are talking about all these challenges and possibilities of collaboration on data governance, I think it's quite interesting to think about CEDAR's goal of trying to find solutions, find enough information to flag certain behaviors that are harmful for the whole society. Exactly because public procurement, we are thinking about public money, public assets. So a good management of these assets are relevant. So even if we are thinking about personal data and someone requests for their erasure of that data, there is still an assessment if this is possible, exactly because we are thinking about public interest. And then I think this shows a bit of how CEDAR is so relevant for all of these very complex topics that you explored.
Yeah, it's been really useful and helpful to get a better understanding of the multifaceted and complex concept of data sovereignty, more sovereignty on the whole, because this concept, I think, is moving, as you said already, both, is moving far beyond the only digital and data sphere. It's moving to other territory as well. And we are now moving rapidly toward the final part of this, our first episode. And in 2025, I think it's not possible to record any podcast without tackling, at least for a few minutes, the elephant in the room, namely artificial intelligence. So especially for a project like ours that is heavily reliant on artificial intelligence, since this technology is instrumental for the overall setup of the project architecture and many of its correlated outputs. I would like to bring to the table a very last one. I mean, how do you expect AI to be helping to pursue CEDAR objectives from an ethical perspective? What can realistically be expected in the near future? Which are your final thoughts on this? And maybe I can add that some other colleagues after this brilliant episode will also follow in a coming ones. But so you can launch this discussion for the benefit of the future ones. So let's say.
Ooh, indeed, is the question, the $1 million question. But I think when we talk about these data governance systems and projects, we can think of two possibilities of AI use and development. So the first one is to use AI to understand the data, because the data may be meaningful, but sometimes understanding this big data, it's quite challenging. It demands a lot of resources. So we can use AI exactly as a tool to provide better insights about what the data translates, because data, especially big data, can indeed translate a lot of reality. And also which I think it's very connected to a lot of the topics that Giacomo brought up, when we think about AI training, making sure that useful, accurate, and data of quality is available can be very interesting for economic development and then competition, exactly to train useful and accurate AI systems.
Yeah, it's also, I think there is also the question, what are we going to ask to the AI to do, right? Sometimes you see, also, I mean, this is from reporting from the other side of the ocean, that a good AI could run the government, right? It depends also if we have very narrow, specific goals, then I'm all for it, right? There is so much data that is being produced from the public administration every day that probably we will never have the time in our life to read it, to make sense of it. So the AI can be a powerful tool to read complex and huge amount of data being produced. Imagine, in our case, it's for procurement, so we might understand how are we using the resources that we have, specific tools, how much time are being used. So probably there is a way to optimize the use of resources if we are able to understand them more. market behaviors as well. If we do procurement, we want to know about a normally market reply to certain requests that we ask to the market, right? To certain demand that a public administration might have. But if you want to use AI to find bad behaviors, or we want to use AI to find corruption, fraud, fighting the evil, those are very broad, very abstract questions that a machine can only do damage in here, can only start pointing, spitting out results that are based on certain assumptions. And I'm sure this is not what CEDAR wants to do. It's not in our plans. But even though there is always a temptation, right, of having a very powerful tools that can help us to solve endemic or perpetual humans failures, that need to be careful and use the tools for what they are better, right, to support on very specific and targeted objectives.
So great, guys. I think this is exhaustive enough, and I think it's enough for a wrap up time. I'd like first and foremost to sincerely thank you for having joined us this first episode, and for all the insightful points that you've been able to bring to the table of discussion today. Again, I would like to repeat that this is not going to be a standalone episode. More will be following over time, over the next few weeks and months, and we will bring in other partners, other colleagues that we will most likely tackle different subject matters, different angles, maybe different European policies as well. And I would like to think that they will be hopefully able to provide us even a walk through the actual and tangible results of the project, since we are moving toward our second half of the CEDAR initiative. And so at this moment, I'd like again to thank you all, to thank all the listeners that are going to walk alongside us in this new journey. So let's keep in touch, and do not forget to follow our main channels on social media, most of all, to keep abreast of all of our news and next coming episodes that will be issued in a very foreseeable future. So take care all, and have you all a fantastic day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
CEDAR Podcast.